Hello and welcome to Hey Ask Me Stuff, the show where you ask me stuff and then I answer it too. You don't just ask the questions, I actually answer the questions. My name is Ken Coughlin. I am a Christian apologist and a staff member here at Trinity Lutheran Church in Joppa, Maryland. And over there behind the glass is our illustrious producer, and he is...
B.A. Thomas.
Hello, B.A. Thomas. How are you today?
I'm doing okay.
Welcome. Let me tell you a little bit about the show as we get started here. The show is called Hey Ask Me Stuff, and the idea behind it is for you, the viewer, to have input and voice and frankly decide lots of times what we're actually talking about here on the show. And there's ways you can do that. The number one best way, let's say you have a pressing question. You have something you've always wondered about, doubted about, whatever it may be about Jesus, Christianity, the Christian faith, Bible, God, whatever it may be, all right? And maybe it's one of those questions where you've been afraid to ask it. You're afraid maybe it's going to make you look, well, one of my friends going to think about me if I voice this. First of all, no church should be that way. We should welcome questions. But that's what we're here for, too. So here's how you get your question on the air here on Hey Ask Me Stuff. You visit the website, trinityjoppa.org/askmestuff. And on that, there is a form that you can fill out. You submit your question to us. We read your question. We go through any questions we get, and we call them to pick. Call's probably not a good word. Isn't that like something murderous intent? I don't know that.
I mean, call is technically used in the Bible, I think, for wheat, but let's not use call.
Let's not use call. Let's back off of that call thing. We'll sift through them, also use the wheat, but more appropriate.
Yes.
To choose what we're going to be doing for that week. So visit that website, submit your question. We also like to post things on our subreddit. Our subreddit is called Talk About God. Lots of times when we do that, we've kind of picked the general direction we're going to go already, and we'll ask a question that somehow pertains to it to kind of get some feedback to see what people's thoughts are. But that is another way that you can get your voice heard potentially here on the show, is by answering whatever the prompt is that we put out there, usually on Mondays in that subreddit, Talk About God. And also, before we move on, if you do like this show, you like what we're talking about here today, do us a couple things here, if you wouldn't mind. Number one, share it. Share this video with your friends. Tell your friends about it. You never know, it might benefit them as well. Number two, like it. Go ahead and click that like button for us. And also subscribe to the YouTube channel. Click that little notification bell. We got a lot of great programming here on the Trinity Joppa YouTube channel. Not just things like this and worship services. We've got the new 513 show for those musicians that are out there. Check out our homepage. You're going to see a wide variety of content on there. Lots of good stuff for Christians and even non-Christians on our channel. So without further ado, let's dive right in, shall we? So the general topic that we want to talk about today was actually inspired by Pastor Jay's sermon this past weekend. We are currently working through a sermon series called the Red Letter Challenge. And this past weekend's message was about forgiveness. Yeah. And forgiveness is obviously something that people can struggle with. And B.A., I'm going to share with you what my kind of inspiration, why this is one that hits home for me, and the angle that I wanted to take, and then I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts. I've heard, well, first of all, look, we all know that Jesus wants us to forgive, right?
Yeah.
All right. And we'll dive into that more a little bit here in a second. But I've heard many pastors preaching on forgiveness, and they basically take the approach of almost exclusively saying it's a choice. You get to choose whether you forgive or not. Mm-hmm. And while I think technically that is true, I think it sometimes causes confusion for people, because for a lot of people, maybe they don't understand what the Bible means exactly by forgiveness, but they think of forgiveness as being something that means that I have to feel better, somehow make myself feel better about this person who wronged me. And I mean, in other words, there's an emotional component to it. It's not just an intellectual thing. There's an emotional component.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, think of it this way. This is the example I give sometimes. Imagine somebody who's just suffered some great loss. Yeah. All right. And they're feeling pain and they're sorrow and they're sad and they're crying. And you just walk up to them and say, stop feeling sad. It's a choice. Make the choice to stop feeling sad now. How does that come across?
Yeah. I've heard that before in other contexts, and it still is unfathomably uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that word. Unfathomably uncomfortable.
Yeah.
There was, I'm sorry, this is somewhat unrelated, except I like your phrase, unfathomably uncomfortable. My wife and I were watching a football game this past weekend, college football game, and of course we had the remnants of Ira coming through.
Yeah.
And so everything was raining. And one of the announcers, I love this phrase, I'm going to use it from now on. He said, "It's not really raining here. It's more like an aggressive mist." I just love that phrase.
Yeah.
It's an aggressive mist. I'm
Yeah.
going to start using that from now on. It's not really raining. It's more just like an aggressive mist. And the thing is, I know exactly what he's talking about. You can picture that. Anyway, that's kind of why this hits home to me, because what I wanted to do really today was more show, I'll talk a little bit about what the Bible says about forgiveness, but more a question of how to do it. How do we forgive when it's hard? Because I think when people just hear, well, just do it. It's just a choice. Nike, just do it. That I think that could leave a sour taste in people's mouth.
Yeah.
Am I wrong?
Oh, absolutely not.
Okay.
No. Yeah.
Right.
There's things in my life that I am working on forgiving people for. Like, I know it's not entirely on purpose. Coming from a psychological background, there's nature, there's nurture, there's literally things that someone has learned who is, let's say, 75 years old now, that they learned when they were 3 years old and have been doing for 72 years. Like, there's the math on that. Okay, I'm not going to change someone in 72 years for like a conversation in less than a minute. They have their ways and they are very set in them, and I can't change it. And whatever they have done may not be entirely their active choice. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that I love that example, because that's kind of what we're going to get at, and what I think causes a lot of people confusion about this issue, because how someone else responds or behaves actually has nothing to do with your ability to forgive them and the command of forgive them. We'll talk about that in a minute. I want to actually use kind of Matthew 18 as kind of the model for this conversation, because it has kind of both aspects of what I want to talk about in here. I mean, Matthew 18, if we look at and if you have a Bible, you want to follow along, great. Otherwise, I'm going to read it. So if we look at verses 21 and 22 of Matthew 18, that's a passage that a lot of people are familiar with. It says this, "Then Peter came to Jesus and asked, 'Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother when he sins against me? Up to 7 times?'" And understand, that's kind of like how Peter's doing it. It's like, up to 7 times? Go ahead, Jesus, pat me on the back and say how noble and honorable I am. And the reason being is because you got to understand the Jewish thought at the time, coming from the book of Amos. If you look at the first 2 chapters of the book of Amos in the Old Testament, God is repeatedly saying, that he is going to, let me get the exact language here. I don't want to misquote God, He goes through a lot of different people. He says, for 3 sins of Gaza, or even 4, I will not turn back my wrath. And then he goes on. And what he's doing in those first 2 chapters, he names different groups. And he keeps saying that same kind of line. For 3 sins of them, or even 4, I will not hold back my wrath. Well, the implication there is for the first 1 or 2, he will hold back his wrath. Mm-hmm. And so there was this belief in Judaism at the time that you were supposed to forgive someone 3 times. And then after that 3rd time, no need to forgive them. You don't need to forgive them anymore. So Peter comes to Jesus thinking, I'm going to say that I'll forgive someone more than twice the number of times I'm supposed to, because I know Jesus is going to give you a good old, you good and faithful servant, you go there. And that's not what happened. That's the fun part. And so Jesus goes on, he says, Jesus answered, I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times, or some translate it 70 times 7 times, which would be 490. So, you have to forgive people 490 times, and that 491st time, you don't have to forgive them anymore. No, that's not what Jesus is saying. I mean, the whole point is it's supposed to be some incredibly high number that, for all intents and purposes, you're not tracking, you're not counting, you're just forgiving. And so we look at that passage and we say, well, clearly Jesus expects us, just as a matter of course, we're supposed to have an attitude of forgiveness to people. Yeah. That's what we're supposed to do. But then we're faced with this problem of, well, sometimes it's hard. And I'll give you one example I could give it a lot of times. What about abuse victims? All right. Let's say that someone has suffered immense physical or emotional abuse from someone. Does that mean that they are supposed to forgive their abuser? The short answer is yes, but don't jump on me yet. Watch the rest of the episode, okay? And why do I say that? Let's think about what Jesus said on the cross, all right? Jesus had been spit on. He had been ridiculed. He had been whipped with a cat o' nine tails, okay? He had been beaten. He had his hands and feet nailed to a piece of wood, and he was hanging there dying. Mm-hmm. And then he asked God to forgive the people who did it. Yeah. Okay. So if there is any doubt about whether or not we are called to forgive those who do even the most egregious things against us, the answer is yes. All right. But looking back at Matthew 18, what I think we can't lose perspective on is what led to this conversation with Peter. All right. Right before Peter comes up to Jesus and says, "How many times shall I forgive? 7 times. Look at what Jesus was teaching. And I'm starting here in verse 15. All right. Jesus says this: "If your brother sins against you, go and show him his fault, just between the two of you. If he listens to you, you have won your brother over. But if he will not listen, take 1 or 2 others along, so that every matter may be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. If he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. And if he refuses to listen even to the church, treat him as you would a pagan or a tax collector, or as a non-believer or a tax collector." Well, wait a minute. All right. So here we have Jesus talking specifically about how we are supposed to handle ourselves when we are wronged by someone. And in this context, specifically when you're wronged by someone within the church, right? And he says that the whole point you can see here is to try to show the person who did the wrong thing that they did a wrong thing, and to try to get them to repent. But in the end, Jesus is open to the possibility that after you do all these things, they still don't repent. They still don't say they're sorry. They still don't acknowledge that they did anything wrong. And we've all had someone like that in our lives, haven't we?
Oh, yeah.
That no matter what, they just don't think that they did anything wrong.
Yeah, they're just telling it like it is.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And Jesus doesn't say, you know what, when they do that, even though they haven't acknowledged anything wrong, you just go back to being friends with them, go back to being in communion with them. He doesn't say that. He says, treat them like you would a pagan or a tax collector. All right. So Jesus is not calling us necessarily to reconcile with our abusers. All right. Now, this is the important distinction. There is a distinction in the Bible between forgiveness and reconciliation. Forgiveness is referring to a state of our heart, how we are looking to treat someone necessarily. And it's also, and this is a good example I heard from someone that I think is very helpful, it's demanding repayment from someone for what they did to us, all right? Forgiveness would be not demanding the repayment, not insisting that we be repaid. Now, that's not to say there aren't other consequences for people's actions. I mean, the Bible is very clear that, the state holds the sword for a reason. So if you commit a crime against someone, forgiveness does not mean we have to go and tell the judge, no, don't sentence that person. The civil authorities still serve a purpose. Forgiveness is talking about us and how we are treating someone. And it's saying that we should not be demanding additional payment from this person for the sin they committed against us. Doesn't mean they don't have to face the other consequences. You know what? You have premarital sex and someone gets pregnant, that's a consequence. Forgiveness doesn't mean we have to offer to adopt that child. There are consequences to those actions. So that's forgiveness. What is reconciliation? Reconciliation is restoring the relationship to where it was before the offense occurred. All right, getting back to whatever that friendship was, whatever that intimate relationship was, whatever that marriage was before the offense occurred. Understand this. When I'm saying there's a difference between forgiveness and reconciliation, I'm not saying God does not value reconciliation. Sure, he does. All right. Matter of fact, I would say most of the time, that is what God wants us to shoot for. He does want us to shoot for reconciliation. All right. However, there are occasions where reconciliation is not appropriate. There are never occasions where forgiveness is not appropriate. That's the difference. We see this in Matthew chapter 18. Jesus gives us an example where reconciliation was not appropriate. All right. But then right after that, Peter asks him about forgiveness, and he talks about, no, even though reconciliation isn't always appropriate, forgiveness always is. You should still be forgiving 70 times 7. All right. And so that is the difference between the two. We are always called to forgive. We should always try to shoot for reconciliation, but also have the wisdom to realize there are times when reconciliation is not appropriate. In that circumstance I gave before, where I said, what about people who have suffered physical, emotional abuse, things like that? Well, that's one of those times. Should the person forgive their abuser? Yes, in the context of what I talked about. They should not be demanding additional payment from that person, all right? They should try not to be harboring bitterness for that person in their heart. And understand, when I say additional payment, there are different ways we ask for repayment for people who've done something wrong to us. Sometimes it can be literally demanding that they do something. Well, I want them to pay me back X amount of dollars for this. I want to pay my medical bills, or I want them to, they have to come and they have to say they're sorry, or I'm not going to forgive them. Demanding they do something takes some action. Another way that we exact payment upon people who've done us wrong is by us taking action to try to inflict pain upon them. And you hear pain, embarrassment, whatever. You hear this all the time. It's almost like we want them to feel what we felt, and we won't forgive them unless they feel what we felt, what we went through. Both are equally wrong as far as forgiveness is concerned, all right? So any kind of forgiveness is not demanding that payment from them, all right? Now, what I want to, so that's the first step. The first step to understanding that, how do we forgive, is to have a proper perspective on what forgiveness is, all right? When the Bible tells you to forgive someone, when Jesus tells you to forgive even the people who have done the most egregious things to you, all right, that does not mean necessarily having to reconcile the relationship, all right? Sometimes, yes, that is what Jesus wants us shooting for. Other times it's not, all right? And he does acknowledge that. So that's number one. Number two, as far as how to forgive or what to remember when we're trying to forgive, is that think about that definition I just gave you about forgiveness, all right? I didn't say anything about the pain going away. Forgiveness is not about somehow willing the pain you are feeling to disappear. We can't do that, all right? Pain is an emotional response. It is a natural response when something has been something's been done to us that is wrong. But even when we're feeling the pain, we can still make the choice not to try to exact payment, all right, from the other person, all right? We can still make a conscious choice not to be going around and gossiping and bad-mouthing the other person, behind their back, things like that. We can still make those choices. Forgiveness involves our actions and what we do, all right? And so, but it's not, the other thing to remember is it's not about making the pain go away. So when you're thinking, how can I possibly forgive this person because I hurt so much? Yeah, you're going to hurt because somebody did something wrong to you, and that's natural, and that's something that you need to work through. And there's a process for that. You can't expect that to just disappear overnight, and Jesus doesn't ask you to. All right. Third thing, and I have 5 total, just so you know. The third thing about how do we forgive when it's hard? So number 1 was remembering that forgiveness and reconciliation are 2 different things. Number 2 is remembering forgiveness is not about making the pain go away. Number 3, and this is the hard one, is to remember that unforgiveness is a sin, all right? Why do I say this is hard? Because someone who needs to forgive is someone who's been a victim, right? And so when you don't ever want to look at someone who's been victimized and tell them they're doing something wrong, But the Bible doesn't always give us that luxury, because Jesus does say you should be forgiving 70 times 7. If you're not doing what Jesus tells you to do, what are you doing? We all understand what that is in any other context. It's a sin, okay? So unforgiveness and having a continual habit of unforgiveness especially is a sinful attitude. Why do I say that is something to bear in mind when figuring out how to forgive? Because I ask you a simple question. what do you do to keep yourself from sinning in other circumstances? I mean, if it is a sin like other sins, then there are certain strategies we can employ that we employ to help resist other types of sin that may help us here. Number one, do you have an accountability partner? Do you have an accountability partner? One thing if we think that we are going to be able to resist sin all on ourselves, all on our own, we're kidding ourselves, all right? That's the reason that the church community exists, that we are not supposed to be isolated Christians. We are supposed to exist in community with one another, and we are supposed to hold each other accountable. It was Martin Luther who actually said something along the lines of, he was convinced that if we as Christians did not continue to hold each other accountable, that would only be within a year, we would be worse than any heathen, is what he actually said. Because we need to be able to, just like any other sin, be willing to allow someone into our lives that we trust, who can correct us, who can call us out on saying, hey, I know you're hurting, all right? But this attitude you're having right now is not healthy. It's not a healthy one. It's something we need to work through, and be willing to listen to that. Another thing about keeping in mind that it's a sin is having the right attitude about sin. In other words, we often, when we look at forgiveness, and especially somebody who's done something really, really bad to us, we'll often say something like, they don't deserve my forgiveness. And you know what? You're right. They don't. But guess who else doesn't deserve forgiveness? You. Guess who still forgave you? Jesus. All right? You ever heard the phrase, there before the grace of God go I? And so we understand that when we are looking at someone saying they don't deserve my forgiveness, you're right, they don't. But we also do not deserve forgiveness for the sins that we have committed, but Jesus still forgave us. So when we're talking about forgiving others, understand, it's not about whether the person who did the wrong deserves forgiveness. They don't. It's about whether Jesus deserves for you to forgive someone because of what he did for you. All right? Jesus forgave you even though you didn't deserve it. And not only did he offer you that forgiveness, but think about what he went through to get it for you. All right? He went through all of that. Then at a minimum, he deserves to be honored. And he deserves for you to be willing to forgive others and offer that same forgiveness that he extended to you, to other people when he asks you to do that. It's not about what they deserve. It's about what Jesus deserves. All right? Number 4. All right? The number 4 tip to help us forgive when it's hard. So again, number 1, forgiving, knowing the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. Number 2, forgiveness is not about making the pain go away. Number 3, remembering that forgiveness is a sin. So how do we protect ourselves from other sins? Number 4, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. I'm just rattling out the bad, cheesy sayings nowadays today. Okay. But just like any other sin as well, if you wait until you're going through a hard time to try to take the spiritual actions needed to help you in that hard time, you're going to have a more of an uphill battle, all right? The time to prepare your heart to be able to deal with pain is before the pain comes. So you need to spend more time in the Bible. You need to spend more time in prayer, all right? You need to spend more time reflecting on everything we just talked about in number 3, about what Jesus did for you. Because if you internalize those things before the pain comes, then it's almost like putting on a suit of armor, isn't it? And that's going to help you when the pain does come to work through it more quickly, to work through it in a better, more healthy way, and to get to that point where you're not holding a grudge, where you're not trying to inflict pain on someone just because they inflicted pain on you. All right? And number 5, the last tip I have for how to forgive someone when it's hard, when you've been through pain. Well, it comes from Matthew chapter 5, verses 43 and 44. Tell me if you've heard this one. You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Sound familiar?
Yeah.
lots of times when we read those verses, we focus on Jesus saying, love your enemies. But he didn't just say, love your enemies. He then went on to say, pray for those who persecute you. I'd like to ask you to imagine a child who's standing in front of a parent, trying to justify something to that parent that child did wrong. How long is it going to take that child to realize that mom or dad ain't buying it? It ain't going to take long, right? Yeah. You're standing in front of the parent who knows you did something wrong. You're going to know that they see right through you. Jesus tells us to pray for those who persecute us, meaning tip number 5 is pray for the people who did wrong. Why? Because if you're talking to God, you're going to have a lot harder time trying to justify your heart of unforgiveness, because you know darn well that God sees right through you. All right? And so this is a practical step you can take. It's not going to be easy, but if you commit yourself to sit down and pray for that person who did something wrong for you, first night, it's going to be hard. It's going to be darn near impossible. But then you know what you do? The second night, you do it again. Yep. Third night, you do it again. Fourth night, you do it again. And what you're going to find is you're going to feel God calling you out more and more every single time you do it, to the point where you will eventually start to mean it. How long that's going to take, I can't tell you. I mean, it's different for every person, and it's obviously going to be different depending on the pain that's been inflicted upon you. All right? But you commit yourself to doing that, and that is going to help you get to that point where you're not holding that grudge, where you're not wishing pain on that other person. Even psychologists will tell you this is a healthier attitude to have. Forgiveness helps you, which is why God wants you to do it. And what you should see through all 5 of these tips is that forgiveness is not about the other person. It's about you. All right? It's a healthier thing for you. It's about you and your heart and your actions. That's why when we avoid it because of what the other person did or what the other person deserves, we're missing the point. All right? We're missing the point. So those are my 5 tips for how things that can help you, how to go about forgiving like Jesus, how to forgive when it's difficult. Now, we did throw out there on Reddit the following question, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell everybody what the question was that kind of ties into this. And then BA, I'm going to ask BA just to not randomly, he can pick whatever he thinks is most important answers that people on Reddit gave that we can kind of reflect upon based upon the principles we've talked about here with forgiveness. And the question was this: is it possible for someone to do something so bad that it becomes okay not to forgive them? And BA, throw one at me.
Wham. All right. I'm going to pick on Alarming Prophet 5148. Probably not, but only if they make amends, fully repent, are paid back for it, and definitely and permanently change for the better.
All right.
So
let me ask you, what do you see in that? Based on what we've talked about here, what do you see in that one?
I mean, I see the first half of that is right, but then immediately afterwards...
It's qualifying it, isn't it?
Yeah, like Jesus doesn't say give qualified forgiveness 490 times. He says give forgiveness 490. Oh, essentially an infinite amount of times. Like, what is it? The number 7 is important because
70 times 7. Well, yeah, it's the number of completeness.
It's complete. Forgive them a complete number of times for a completeness number of times. Completely forgive them all the time, every time. That's the idea.
Yeah, and you'll see, and what he went on to, the qualifications that he or she, I don't know, Alarming Prophet's a male or female, what they put on there was everything about the person who did the harm. It is that exacting payment, exacting something back from them. Now, that is speaking of reconciliation, that is something that's important for reconciliation. I mean, if you can't reconcile a relationship unless both parties are committed to doing it.
Yeah.
And so, well, that's part of why I say that, yes, reconciliation is something that God does want us to pursue almost all the time, but there are exceptions, obviously, where it'd be dangerous to do so. But in order to achieve that, yes, you do need the person to be willing to make amends, to realize they did something wrong, to repent, to change for the better. These are all things that are necessary. And we need to have the humility to realize that we all need to do that too, because we've done things that we shouldn't have done as well.
Yeah.
But none of that is relevant to forgiveness.
Yeah.
The way we've talked about it.
Yeah, it isn't.
Yeah.
And then I just want to say something personally too. Like, on the one hand, there is forgiveness, and Jesus describes in Matthew that you should forgive, but that's before, during, and after you take them aside and show them, hey, this is the thing that you've done and it's wrong, and here's why. Oh, you don't believe me? Okay, look, I'm gonna go get Paul and, I don't know, Luke or somebody, and we're coming back to you and we're gonna talk about it. Okay, you don't believe them, I'm gonna take it to the church. Okay, you don't believe the church either. It was nice knowing you. I'll see you later. Best of luck. But once you show someone that it's wrong and they understand it, and they should be moved, at least in my opinion, to begin the reconciliation process. Like, the forgiveness should be complete on your side, and then for them, upon seeing they're wrong, they should be moved to give you the payment anyway.
They should.
Yeah. They
should. But I think what forgiveness is about, and what we need to remember, is we can't control other people's actions.
Yeah.
And when you're not willing to forgive, in the context we talked about it today, a biblical context, because someone's not willing to say they're sorry, I mean, really what you're doing is you're allowing that person to hurt you twice.
Yes.
They've already hurt you once, and now you're giving them the control over your emotional state to allow yourself to remain in that bitter state just because they won't take an action that you think they should take.
Yeah.
Don't give them the power over you.
Yeah.
Don't give them the power.
To shift it out of something personal and put it more transactionally. If a thief steals from your store, if they steal a candy bar and it's $1.50, yes, they stole. Yes, they should be charged under the law. But to demand $1.50 for what they've done, in addition to ruining someone's life, I think you can let that go, because that person's, going to go to jail, or the Christian
probably not for $1.50. I'm just letting you know.
Not for $1.50.
The lawyer's saying probably not.
But they're going to get a mark on their record. It's
yes.
something that's going to affect them for the rest of their future because they made a really bad decision. And like, hey, you stole. Crap, I stole. If the person understands what they have done wrong, why it is wrong, and how it feels to be wrong, if they engage in empathy, I think that person should be moved to be like, okay, look, this is $1.50. I am sorry. Here's $3. Like, I wish I could give you more, but this is what I've earned to replace for the wrong that I've done. I know it doesn't replace it, but here's something that I hope starts to make up for it. Like, I feel like that idea of reconciliation is the part that glorifies God, that we're not allowing to happen when we demand forgiveness from someone else.
Yeah, and and I think what you're saying is illustrating why, Jesus puts that in Matthew 18, is because God doesn't want us to say, oh, well, someone hurt me. All right, well, I forgive them. I'm not going to demand a payment and go about our merry way. Yes, he wants us to do that, but he also wants us to approach the person and say, hey, you hurt me. And he wants, if that doesn't work, then go with another person and then go to the church, because he does value reconciliation. He wants that person to realize they did something wrong, because it's going to help that person grow. And again, I'm going to keep hammering this home. Understand, sometimes that person is you. Sometimes that person is me. We need to stop reading these scriptures and always seeing ourselves on one side of them when we are quite often on both. Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's God obviously values that, because he doesn't just say, just forgive. he says, yes, you should be forgiving, and you should also be attempting to restore the relationship. All right. And so obviously there's value in that, because ideally that we want to be unified. We want to all grow. We all want to get to the point where we're doing the right thing. Yeah. Is there another comment on there you want to pick out?
I do kind of like this one from Astrea, Astreja. Sorry if it's in another pronunciation. I don't think it's healthy. I'm sorry. Let me try that again. I've got an echo in my ear. I don't think it's healthy to force you to forgive. There are benefits of letting go of old grudges, but it happens on its own time, and sometimes not at all if the pain runs deep.
Yeah, and that's, remember the second tip that I gave for understanding how to forgive like Jesus. And that was to remember that forgiveness, the biblical model forgiveness, is not about making the pain go away. It's not. The pain is still going to be there. And what Astrea is hitting at here, I think, is just that reality, is that pain is not a light switch. You can, and this is, again, why I kind of take issue when pastors just say, just forgive. It's a choice. And they leave it at that. I mean, yes, there is a choice. It is a choice on our part whether to demand repayment of someone. Okay, that is a choice. And so I'm not disagreeing. I'm saying that there's more to the answer than what they're giving. And by not giving them more, I think it almost misrepresents and turns people off. Yeah. Because people like Astrea here are hearing, when all you say is it's a choice, choose to forgive, they're hearing that you're telling them to make a choice to flip that switch on their pain. And that's not a matter of choice, all right? That's a matter of long-term healing process that we all often have to go through. And so to that comment, I would just say that, yes, you're right in the sense that if we were saying by you should forgive, if we were saying you should force yourself not to feel these emotions, then I'd agree wholeheartedly, Astrea. But that's not what we're saying. And I think that's something that we need to keep in mind to understand what forgiveness is, what it is not, so that we, number one, don't use that as an excuse not to forgive. And number two, make sure we're getting the help that we need to deal with that pain and allowing people the help that they need to deal with that pain. So, anything else? Pick one more. I'll give you one more.
All right, here's the curveball. In my opinion, and since you're asking, yep, I'd say that it is.
It is possible for someone to do something so bad that it becomes okay not to forgive them, is what this person...
That's the first part of Campbell Hayden, who is struggling with something that happened to their parents. And I'm guessing that it affected them for a very long time. And it sounds like he might be dealing with that second portion. It sounds like he's still hurt by it. And yeah, I can't ask him to not hurt. That's not fair. It's not good. It's not right. He's definitely still hurting by it. But
yeah, and this is something, I mean, a lot of people have been through things like this, unfortunately. Something horrible was done to this commenter's parents, and turns out he ended up knowing the people that did it. And he says here towards the end of this paragraph, I would not choose to excuse them for what they did in a million years. Even said earlier, if either or both of them are no longer among the living, that's just fine with me, to show you the depths of the pain that this person was feeling. And this is one of those times where we need to be sensitive to the pain, and why I think that second thing I mentioned is so important. And it's important from a pastoral perspective that forgiveness is not about making the pain go away. All right? That's a different thing. And that's something that we need to work through, obviously. As a Christian, and keep in mind, we're asking these questions on Reddit. I don't know if these people are Christian or not. They might not accept our values. But as a Christian, we look at what Jesus went through. Again, I said this at the beginning. Leading up to the cross, on the cross, and still while he's hanging there feeling this pain, he says, Father, forgive them. He asks the Father to forgive the people who did this to him. All right? That's hard to look at and not see that, yeah, there's really no limit to how egregious someone's behavior can be when it comes to forgiveness. We're still supposed to forgive, as we've talked about it here. And I guess what I would point out in relation to this one commenter is he said, I would not choose to excuse them for what they did in a million years. And I think part of the struggle that a lot of people deal with when it comes to forgiving in these circumstances is exactly that, is that they're equating forgiveness with excusing their behavior.
Yeah.
Forgiveness is not about excusing their behavior. Like I said, there are still going to be consequences that they can and should have to face for the actions that they took. There are legal consequences they can take. They're going to have to face. There are potentially other consequences they're going to have to face. Forgiveness is about us not adding to those consequences that they have to face from a personal, relational standpoint. But it's not about excusing. It's not about saying, you know what, I think what you did is okay. It's never about that. Of course, what they did is not okay. And it's not about making the pain go away, all right? And it's not about even reconciling the relationship. In the circumstance that is being described here, with the severity of what was being described here, I would tend to agree. That's a relationship that's probably not going to be reconciled. And I don't think God's going to hold that against you. That's not sinful in my mind, not to seek out reconciliation of that relationship when that egregious of a harm was done. But not forgiving, in the sense we've talked about here, is sinful. And again, we don't need to look any further than Jesus on the cross to realize that, yeah, we're still called to forgive, even in these extreme circumstances. Yeah. All right. That's a tough note, but a powerful note, I think, to end on. So that's where we're going to end our discussion for today. I'd just like to remind everybody, if you felt benefited at all in any way, shape, or form by this video, to please share it. Tell others about it. Let them know about it. Also, if you could, go ahead and like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel. We got plenty of things here at Trinity Joppa that are powerful. Not just this program, but obviously we have the worship services, the sermons, the 513 show, and we've got more new programming coming. Right, BA?
That's right.
That's right. We won't say what, but everybody, I will tell you, everybody in the media department has an assignment for some type of show that they are currently producing. So we've got a lot of new content coming out. So click that notification bell so you don't miss out on any of that. Also, just a reminder that this is a viewer-driven program. So if you have a topic you would like to see us talk about, please go to that website, trinityjoppa.org/askmestuff, and submit your question or topic there for consideration to be included on a future episode of this program. And if you're not watching us live, you're watching us after the fact, go ahead and drop your comment in the comment section. We'd love to hear your thoughts about forgiveness, struggles you may have had, and what you think about some of the things we talked about today, the distinction between forgiveness and reconciliation, things like that. Let us know what you think about it. We'd love to hear from you. All right? We will be back again next week. We are live every Wednesday at 3 o'clock Eastern Time. So make sure you mark your calendars to join us again at that point in time, or afterwards, whenever you can see it. All right? Thank you, BA, not just for your lovely, wonderful, amazing producing duty. I know, lovely. I've done this the second time I've done that. Again, it's a carryover from when my wife was the producer of Trinity Talk Live. I always said, our lovely producer, that was okay. I mean, I'm sure you're a lovely person. I'm sure
thank
you
you.
are.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I'm sure you are. But thank you for not only being a great producer, but for also your contributions to the conversation today. I really appreciate it.
Anytime.
And thank you all for watching, and both now, in the past, and in the future. Until next time, God bless.